Welcome everybody who's joined us so far. We may have more people coming into the workshop as we move along. And first of all, just to say a warm welcome on behalf of myself. I'm Ralph Tench. I'm a member of the board of UPrera and the past president for UPrera. And I'm going to be working today with my colleagues on this workshop, Dr. Johanna Fawkes and Dr. Gemma Bridge. So we are running a session which is roughly about publishing in our discipline. And I'll just say a few words, first of all, before I hand over to colleagues to go through what we've done over the last year or so. The question that we've raised is around how we, in public relations and communication management as a growing field, how we engage in our academic scholarship worldwide. Because as a board for UPrera, we kind of realised that there's little known really empirical work around understanding where we publish our research and why in fact we go to those places that we do publish. We know that there's a growing population of academics in the field, and yet there's a fairly small number of dedicated publications in that field and in that space. If you add into that all of us, both on a institutional level, a departmental level, are encouraged to publish and are put under some varying degrees of pressure depending on the stage of our careers to publish. But we also, in many countries around the world now, have pressure from above. So it's outside our institutions. We have the demands of the government or the funding associations in our national context, which expect us to show value for money for the work that we do in our publication outputs. And they put pressure on the institution, they put pressure on ourselves. And the other thing is that we kind of identified that we don't really understand in a research sense that much about the career journeys of people in the field. So going from early career to mid-career to late career. So that was another question that I think we had emerging from the board of understanding this particular area. And so for that reason, we decided to support a small project which would explore what it's like to publish in our field and try to get the views and opinions of people who are regular publishers, but also to recognise particularly the journey that early career researchers go on, and can we provide some more guidance, some more support, some more enlightenment as to how best to manage that journey as you travel along. So they were the overarching ambitions that we had for the project. I'll now hand over to Johanna, who will then talk through the kind of contextual information of where we started from, and then we'll talk about the detail of what we found out. But ostensibly, this session is about allowing you to ask questions as well. So there's a bit of an input element while we talk to you about what we've studied and what we've found out. And then later on, there is going to be the chance for questions and answers. So you'll see, hopefully, on your screens that you can go to the Q&A section and you type in your questions. Let us know who you are, where you are, so we can contextualize, and we'll go through and try and answer those as we're going along. If there's a lot, we may have to answer some of them in writing, but hopefully we can get as many as possible answered during this session. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Jo.
Jo, I'll just share my screen for you, okay?
Yeah, thank you. That's what I was just asking, great. Okay, so this takes you through the background. There's a poll there that I think you can complete while listening. Yes, that's the barcode at the bottom that suggests where we're going.
Start there.
And you can answer that. Yes, so there's the poll right at the beginning, just so we can map participants, and it will be helpful when we have the discussion as well. The next.
You want to do the poll?
Do I need to?
You can launch it now.
Yeah, do the poll now.
You can launch it. Is the poll available now? Yes. Okay, fine. And can that run on while we're speaking?
No, we'll just do it now and then we can end it and then we can talk about it at the end if that's okay. Let's give it 30 seconds because there's 22 people, 10 have voted so far. Okay, 5 more people. Okay, I'll let you carry on, Joe.
Okay, thanks. So the next slide, again, Gemma, yes, overview. So as Ralph has described, we've got the general problem of being in an emerging or hybrid field where there is generally a lack of respect perhaps for public relations. And in fact, now Gemma, the problem I've got here is I can't see my notes on your screen. I'm sorry, this is a technical thing I can use. I'm just going to have to minimize this because all my literature and so on is on my screen, not yours. No, that's not going to work. Okay, I've got most of it in my head. So part of what we were looking at was the pressure to publish in journals, and the research showed that most European scholars are under pressure of one sort or another, where their value as a scholar is assessed by their institution, sometimes on purely institutional level and sometimes at a national level. In almost all of the frameworks that we've seen or looked at in this research project, there was a pressure to publish in journals, not surprisingly, with a high reputation. And obviously that begs the question of who decides which journals have a high reputation. And there's a particular problem when it comes to new and emerging fields, and public relations is not alone in this respect, because obviously the field itself is relatively new, 50, 60 years of academic activity. And the journals do not, on the whole, have anything like the status of the long established scientific journals in other fields, you know, such as health, law, etc., etc. There are also another issue for public relations scholars is that there are a small number of devoted journals in the field. That means we worked out that there was between 20 and maybe 50 articles available or publishing opportunities available to the entire global community of public relations scholars. So that also provides a challenge to anybody seeking to establish their reputation as a published academic. And finally, and this emerged both in the literature and elsewhere, there's a strong dominance of English language journals, and almost all the ranking systems are primarily based on English language journals. So there's a very strong bias towards publishing in what may well not be your first language. So we looked at the literature, and again, the full details and the background and the sources for this literature will be supplied to you following this webinar. But it's clear, and many of you will be familiar with this, that PR is, as I said, an emerging, but also a hybrid academic field. It's primarily emerged historically through management disciplines, particularly in America, but has strong connections, obviously, with media, journalism, marketing, and other academic fields. And it's one of its attractions in many ways, but it can create a problem where you're trying to publish in a narrow field in a subject as hard to define as public relations is often perceived to be. As I said, like other PR scholars, there's this requirement to publish. And like other, we did find some literature that showed that our situation is very similar to academics in the field of travel and tourism. Again, a field that expanded rapidly during the 90s and early 2000s, but hasn't yet got the strongly established journals behind it. So again, scholars in those fields seek to publish in their own discipline, but frequently have to publish outside in order to meet publication standards. And finally, the literature showed, and there's some really interesting literature here about the metrics, the systems of measurement used to assess publications as a form of performance. That is, you have to show the value according to a number of different measurements, which are themselves perceived to be very unreliable. This is a critical take on the metrics. They're not actually necessarily fair, they're not reliable. Some long established journals publish poor articles, and small and less established journals actually publish high quality journals. So there's some interesting literature there about the performativity of the public relations scholar, as with other scholars, having to show their value in this particular format. But just because it's a performance doesn't mean it doesn't have consequences. So again, one of the reasons this is so important is because people win and lose jobs on their publication records. So it really matters, and I hope that will emerge in the discussion at the end also. So that was the picture that we established. The research questions that came out from that were two. Firstly, how do public relations and strategic communication academics across different career stages in Europe decide where to publish their research? And the second one was, what factors affect publication decisions for public relations and strategic communications academics across these different career stages in Europe? And we designed the project to follow two particular methods. The first stage was the Delphi method, and that involves, as some of you may already know, it's a sort of circular discussion with a panel of between 12 and 15 experts in the field. And we had 3 rounds of discussion in which various professors identified the issues that they thought were of most concern and relevance to the questions we had raised, until after 3 rounds we came to a kind of synthesis that was then used to form the basis of the wider survey, which was conducted across Europe. And I'm going to hand over to Gemma now, who's going to talk about the findings from those different methods. Thanks.
That's okay. Okay, so we invited 25 academics from across Europe at associate professor level or higher to take part in the first round of the Delphi. 15 of these academics agreed to take part in the first round, and that ran for 2 weeks in October last year. And then 12 panelists agreed to take part in the next 2 rounds, so there's 3 rounds altogether, which ran in November and December of the same year. So we explored the kind of question areas that Joe just spoke through. And first of all, we looked at publishing decisions, or what factors affect the academics' decisions about where to publish. And the 3 most important factors that came out from this phase of the Delphi were, firstly, that the journal was linked or suitable for their research. This was everybody, so everybody taking part in that first round suggested that was important to them. The second factor was the review process, or this quality of the reviews, or the speed with which the reviews came into place. And then the third was the status of the journal in the field, so how old that journal was, or how well it was reputed amongst scholars in their field. Some panelists also suggested that impact factor was the kind of the only factor that they considered when deciding where to publish. Another was, in terms of, for this, for the Delphi phase, was the dilemma of wanting to publish in the field of PR to support the field, but also wanting to publish in high-ranking journals for their career progression or just for their reputations. This was an example of one of the panelists gave a quote here just to say about the review process. So they stated, "The academic world needs to re-examine the peer review system, how it works today. Too many articles, too little quality, too few time for good, high quality reviews with too few reviewers." So this quote here just indicates how important a good review process is to the academics in the Delphi phase. Another finding from the Delphi were that preferred journal outlets. So the panelists were asked to rank the journals in order of perceived impact or importance to them. The journals that were ranked highest were Public Relations Review, Journal of Communication Management, Corporate Communications, and European Journal of Communication Research. But there was disagreement throughout the Delphi about which should be the top ranking journals. One panelist said that although they agreed with the ranking list, they did so in terms of impact and not necessarily in terms of journal quality. Some panelists also said that they published outside the field, and reasons for this included their personal interest or academic goals and wanting to link with others outside of PR and communications. We also explored whether the panelists felt under pressure or felt like they were expected to publish. Most respondents said that they felt under pressure, since their performance is assessed on journal outputs. This was highlighted by one panelist who stated that it's quantity above quality is what matters at university level. And this, they said, is especially important for early career researchers who are looking to move through the ranks. We were keen to explore this further when we moved into the wider survey. And then in terms of pressure, most respondents felt under pressure to publish, but this varied by institution and by academic. However, the panelists again hypothesised that the pressure to publish would be highest for the early career researchers. So we wanted to explore these things through the wider survey, which included early career researchers. So here are the key findings from the wider survey. So we invited scholars from across Europe to take part in this survey. We had some difficulties with recruitment due to university timetables and the COVID pandemic. However, we were still able to retain 30 completed surveys for analysis, which represented scholars from across the academic career spectrum. We asked very similar questions in the wider survey to further explore the findings that came from the Delphi phase. So we asked the scholars from across the career spectrum what factors affected their publishing decisions. In the wider survey, we found that scholars decide for themselves where to publish, and the most important factors affecting their decisions were impact factor, special issue calls, and previous experience with the journals. And then we asked where they prefer to publish. Again, publishing in PR and strategic communication journals was prioritised. And again, Public Relations Review was reported to be the most frequent outlet. This mirrored the Delphi. And this just highlights where the respondents were publishing. So it's again, the same 5 journals were highlighted as being important, with Public Relations Review being ranked first by most respondents in the wider survey. And again, in the wider survey, we found that most of the respondents were expected to publish, but less than half of respondents, which was interesting for us, reported that their university uses a system for evaluating academic outputs. Despite this, most of the respondents felt under pressure to publish, and again, as was hypothesised in the Delphi, this was most acute amongst early career researchers. And then, although this was highlighted in the Delphi phase, it wasn't such an issue that they raised, but in the wider survey, language was an issue raised by many of the respondents. This is potentially because many of the respondents didn't have English as a first language. But despite this, most of the respondents reported that the institution didn't offer any services to help, and that they sometimes struggled with publishing English journals as a result. And in terms of pressure, as was suggested in the Delphi, the wider survey results suggested that the early career scholars felt most under pressure to publish. But in the wider survey, we also found that senior academics reported feeling under pressure. So this pressure may relate to the key promotion stages during the career pathway. So I'll just hand back over to Jo to go over some of the emerging issues that we highlighted from the research. One sec, Jo. Yeah.
Lovely, thanks. So yes, the emerging issues then, to summarise what Gemma has suggested, and to highlight what we hope will frame this discussion. So when I talk about these issues, please think about the relevance to your own experience and whether your experience is identical to our respondents or wildly different. So this is a sort of interesting, and as Gemma said, because we didn't have a huge number of respondents to the study, we continue to be interested in a wide range of views. So we framed the emerging issues that face scholars in our field as having to decide where to publish, and particularly the dilemma between supporting the field, is public relations, but needing to publish in higher status journals outside the field. And the respondents from both rounds, we found people having to negotiate those priorities. We also had the discussion about, and there was an interesting evaluation of the journals available. We asked people to evaluate their experience with different journals in terms of review factors and so on, how quickly things were done. So we got some value from that. We also, again, people were negotiating the different degrees of pressure. And it was interesting that some of the respondents said that they were not facing any pressure, which came as a surprise to those of us in UK academic life, where it's been continuous for almost 20 years now, since the early 90s, or yeah. Then there is the point that a lot of us in the UK don't face, but which anybody who doesn't have English as a first language has to work out how to publish in another language and what support might be needed. And again, be interesting to know whether your institutions do support you in whether it's translation, editing, proofreading, or other services that might be of value to you. And finally, the whole thing, not only about where to publish and which outlet you prefer and the different expectations, but the growing pressure to perform in the public arena. And the question that emerged from the literature also was that some scholars in related fields were publishing kind of less and less substantial work because they were having to hit the publication targets. And that meant you had more people citing each other, citing themselves, going around in circles, publishing in multiple teams, and then revamping it marginally for different publications. One of the researchers we looked at in the literature calls this gaming the system. So it'd be interesting to know whether you've been under pressure to game the system, or whether you've seen that happen, or whether you think the publishing is a healthy and vibrant state right now. So hopefully these will frame the discussion that follows. We do have a set of recommendations that we made for UPRERA, but in many ways we'll put those up, perhaps, Gemma, but come back to the emerging issues to frame the discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe, Ralph, do you want to talk about how the board has?
Yeah, okay, so thank you both of you for that. As Joe's just indicated, we do have some recommendations, and we're going to share all of our slides. You can read those. They're a bit more towards recommendations for the association and for the sort of institutional response. We're really also, though, interested in your experiences. I mean, we've got quite an interesting, from the poll, we can see that we've probably got about 45%, although not everyone responded, and a few more people came afterwards, but it looks like about half are either early career researchers or doctoral students of the response.
I'll share the results now of the poll so everyone can see.
Yeah, they're not everyone. We've got actually many more people who are on the workshop who either
I can relaunch.
Well, we could possibly relaunch and see if it changes, but it looks there as though we've got, like I've said.
1 second.
We're going again.
Sorry.
Well, first time around, it was about 45%, as I calculated it, were early career, masters, PhD in early career. So it looks like currently that's going up and down, and we've got a few more master students now. So we were just interested to see where colleagues were coming from in terms of their experiences, and then that might influence the questions. You'll see on the bottom of your screen there's a Q&A section. what we'd really welcome is your questions, possibly around these emerging issues that we've perceived, and we can talk a bit more about those, or you may have others that you perceive yourselves. So, you know, it's slightly changed the profile of the response. We've got less respondents now than we had first time, actually. Yeah, so we're interested to know, depending on where people are in their career, how do they perceive or experience what we've been talking about? I mean, clearly there are cultural differences, as Joe has indicated. Some national contexts are under more pressure than others. Some institutions, arguably, are under more pressure as well. Sorry, I'm just seeing.
I can end the poll and we can do the question and answers if that's helpful.
Yeah, I'm just kind of trying to see. Yeah, so let's see how we're doing the poll. Sorry, I was just seeing there's a question coming up somewhere. Is that the end now?
Yeah, I'll just leave that one. Okay,
so yeah, we've kind of got a similar figure really. It looks quite well spread actually. You know, approximately a third, isn't it? You know, are different stages. So that's quite useful for us to know and to get the feedback. So Chris has just asked questions to the panelists only or to everyone. To everyone, I'm quite comfortable with everyone, but you can use the Q&A section that we've got on the side. And I think, so here we've got one question coming in, which is, self-confidence is a problem that many new academics feel when they start publishing, especially in some of the renowned public relations journals. This is something I have experienced personally. It seems something hard to achieve at the initial stage of academic life. Do you think senior colleagues can help in this case to give a hand to young researchers in gaining the necessary skills and self-confidence to get their work published in some of these renowned journals? And was it brought as an issue during the study? Well, I'll answer the first part of that, and we may go back into the detail of the findings for the second part. It's a really good question, and I think all of us, I mean, in the very early stages of publishing, I used to talk about this as the emperor's new clothes, because it felt like some people were really good at, you know, being able to put their work out and be confident about what they did. And there was a nervousness sometimes about sharing your work because you're not yet convinced possibly about the quality of that. There's 2 points to raise there for me. One is many of us and many of you on this workshop will be students who are either recently have completed your doctoral study or in the process of completing your doctoral study. One of the things I'll say to doctoral students to give you confidence is quite often you are never going to have such high quality data as you're going to produce when you produce your doctoral thesis. It's probably one of the best pieces of work you'll ever do. Now, why is that? The simple answer is you've spent 4, 5 years probably focusing on just that area with the indulgence of time and energy and guidance and support in one research theme. And so it does allow you to really produce some very high quality data. What that might mean, of course, is that you may need support in publishing. And that's where the role of academic, either supervisors or other peers who you've studied with or worked with can perhaps help you to give you the confidence of how to frame the work you've done in a way that is worthy of publication. That's not to say every PhD is worth publishing, but many are. The data is rich, the data is original, it has to be original in order to be a doctorate. So for one thing is that I would say use your early studies to get your experience of being published. The other thing to say is to build self-confidence is to use the mechanisms that are tried and tested before you publish in a written format in a journal or in another source. Go to conferences and test your ideas. That's the very best way to work out whether your concept and idea is open to challenge or open to critique, and it really does improve the ultimate quality of your writing. So that's the first thing I'd say on self-confidence. Work with others. There's very much a long tradition of working with peers to guide and support you in what you do, and I think that can be quite valuable. Did Gemma or Joe want to answer anything on the second part of that question? Joe?
Yes, I just thought it might be interesting to mention some of the material we discovered in the literature too. Academics were very helpful to me in my early publications, and this conforms, and what Ralph said as well, with the literature, particularly around travel and tourism, where the research, it was a big research study, and they showed that new and emerging scholars wrote
I'm slightly losing Joe your signal. Are you hearing her, Gemma?
No, not great. We may just come back to Joe.
Joe, we'll come back in a minute. Gemma, did you want to come in? Joe, I think we're losing some of your signal at the moment. If you just, we'll just carry on. Gemma, did you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, as an early career researcher, I think for me, it can be quite scary to try and publish in a highly renowned journal, I guess. But for me also, just trying and getting that review comments is really helpful. So in addition to going to conferences and getting feedback from peers, trying to publish in a highly renowned journal, it gets rejected. That's the worst case, but the best case is that you get review comments. So I just say it's worth trying.
Yeah, I mean, and Gemma's is a good case in point where, you know, Gemma's been working with me as one of my PhD students and has had a good experience. I think that's right, Gemma, in publishing and getting that feedback, building on the feedback that you get, and then ultimately seeing the successes that you obtain from it. So jumping to Jao, we've got a question on.
Yep.
Yes, yeah, you know, you're obviously an early career researcher, but you're obviously a little older than some of the younger doctoral students. But I get your question is a good one, and I think it's an interesting point about whether there are those that have certain fashion or zeitgeist. Obviously journals have interests. But in fairness, good research should be valued by editors. And mainly you'll find that those kind of fashion themes, when I say fashion, but subjects that have got some sort of appeal at that moment in time, generally we try in journals to use special issues for those. So a good example, for instance, rather, at the moment would be something like COVID-19 and communication issues related to COVID-19. A number of journals are running special themes and special edited series around that type of issue. We get something similar around other hot topics at the time, which may be around either artificial intelligence or another thematic on governance, and themes will come through in a special issue. Essentially, the quality of the paper is really what journal editors will be looking for, and their journals, they will accept them because the value of their journal is influenced by the quality of the papers that they accept. And Joe, you're back. Do you want to take your mute off and just see if we've got your? Is that a better service? No, still not so good. We've got Denise's question on journals from neighbouring fields like media studies. Would you recommend as accessible for PR researchers? I mean, this is where we've got, again, Gemma and Joe may come in on this, but we've got really interesting data coming from the field. We're absolutely critical. We've got the handful of journals in public relations and communication management that exist. If you then multiplied that by the number of academics worldwide that we have in the discipline, and you have the pressure, which is there for many of us in institutions to publish maybe up to 3 or 4 times a year, the numbers don't add up. So it's quite a simple sum that you can do. The answer is, do they have value? And obviously, and I think we've also seen from some of the respondents that we have that depending on the disciplinary stretch or interests of individuals, it has great beneficial value. The other factor is we can't deny, as Joe pointed out, that some journals have what, although we might dispute them, and I certainly do, they are more established and therefore have higher, whichever metric you use, they have higher ratings or rankings. Now, that does mean that there's pressure in some universities to go for those journals. I'll give you a very straightforward example. I'm the Director of Research in a business and management school, where the predominance, of course, is to use the business school established ranking lists of journals. Inevitably, that prioritizes some of the older disciplines of economics and others that have a long history. And even subjects and disciplines like marketing have a longer history and many more journals that are higher ranked than the communications ones. We're on the lists, but we're quite low down. And there are colleagues who will, for reasons that will enable them to get better citation scores, will go into some of those journals in, for example, related areas of marketing that are going to be interested in the type of things that we write about. And that is back to Joe's kind of instrumentalism or gaming the system. That's what some academics are doing. And it's probably inevitable because of the pressure on the amount of journal space we have, and also the journey that our journals are on. I don't know whether either of you want to come in on that. Joe, are you with us?
Yep, I think I'm back. Apologies for that. Some sort of crash. So yes, no, I think that summarises what we discovered in both the literature and the discussion with respondents so far. But it is a difficult terrain to negotiate. And as others have said, in answer to questions, and there's another question from Sinead here that sort of follows on from that really, which is the importance of reading the literature and getting to know the journals very well. And I know that I certainly did that. It's one of the things that makes it daunting when you're going outside the field. I'm aware of colleagues who have tried to and succeeded in publishing in management journals, for example, and really spent some months reading all the back copies of that journal, so they got a feel for whether the journal preferred qualitative, quantitative, conceptual, the different approaches that were taken by the different editors of those journals. Just to reiterate, another point that Ralph made earlier was the importance of going to conferences, and certainly that's my experience. All my papers were, first the ideas all come to air in conferences and they're then developed. And quite a lot of conferences, I know they're all virtual now, but they quite often do have editors' panels, which can be useful to attend to understand more about how editors are making their decisions. And that can give you insight that could be helpful in the publishing journey too.
Can I just add as well, Sonia has made a very important point that Joe's just touched on again. Absolutely correct that anyone who's going for a particular journal is to do just as Joe's indicated, is that reading and understanding the journal itself and what it's looking for editorially. There are big differences. Even in our field, we can see and feel the differences between some that are highly either statistical or would like data sets to be presented and to be discussed and are very empirical, others that are more qualitative, and then others that are essentially will accept much more discursive, literature-based conversations and discussions that take the discipline forward. So understand the journal itself before you submit. You can also write to an editor with a conceptual idea just to test whether you think they're going to be receptive to what you're suggesting. And that's sometimes a good way of avoiding, the long effort of going into a review process when essentially you may well find that it just does not fit well with the journal's focus or theme. That's particularly important if your work is transdisciplinary. In other words, it may have appeal to different just because of the topic's breadth or what it might cover in its findings. It may have appeal in different areas, and that can be challenging and can be quite problematic sometimes in finding the most appropriate avenue for where to publish. The other question, which I'll come back to the team and see if they've got anything else to add, but Angela's question is an interesting one around the open access issue. Now, this is, I know, a very big and a highly contentious issue for the field. On a personal level, from my institution and in my school, I don't personally will not go to any publications that charge, and I don't fund any of my colleagues in the business school to have their work published. It's a university policy that we do not pay for publication. So an individual academic can choose to do that, but it would not be supported or paid for by the institution. That's a kind of policy on open access that we have. It's different in different disciplines, I know. Did anything else come out that you remember from the conversations? I'm not sure that I can recall anything specific.
We did ask it, and Gemma may have the details. It was a question that came up both, certainly in the Delphi rounds, where we asked people if they'd ever used open access. Gemma, can you remember do you have details there of what the responses were?
I can't remember numbers, but the majority said they don't publish open access because of the payment. But it was highlighted that a lot of researchers and academics across the field publish in different ways. So in blogs, on ResearchGate, and then they have open access research in that way instead of publishing open access. So that was something else that was highlighted.
Mm-hmm. Please feel free to ask any more questions. We had one that just came off the screen from Sinead again, which we've touched on in terms of contacts in the journal, no problem. I don't know, I think you have to read the journal to understand. Your question was around whether to contact them around the tone of voice, relevance, and the positioning. They're the kind of things that you probably gather from reading past articles in the journal. The other thing which is really important in publishing, and particularly when we're trying to position our work as a new researcher and we may be encountering journals for the first time, is to make sure that we capture any of the past debates about the topic that we have. So that really is important, that we don't feel that just because our work has arrived in 2020, no one has ever talked about it before. And I think that's a weakness that some of us have when we come up with a new idea. We think it's the most original thing in the world, but there probably has been something in the debate that's taken place. And if it's taken place in that journal itself and we don't refer to it, then it's very likely the editor will reject you, because they will just think you haven't spent the time, cutting back to the comment made by Sonia and others, of doing your homework as to what that journal's themes, interests and approaches are for the journal. So
if I could just add to that, yeah, one of the advantages, we talked a bit about the disadvantages of being in a hybrid field, because we don't have a solid, publishing history going back hundreds of years, etc., etc. However, it's also a tremendous advantage for new scholars, because in many ways, and I would say an awful lot of my publishing has been about bringing ideas from related fields into the field of public relations and showing the relationship between different bodies of thought in my case, but it could apply equally to applied research, so that it's a field that's actually open to new ideas. And if you can frame public relations, the stuff I'm working on at the moment is around performance, or other people have done a lot of work on promotion recently, you get the chance to actually widen the debate. And increasingly over the last 10 or 15 years, I've found public relations journals are open to that, even though historically they primarily published quantitative research findings. So the field is changing, and it can be quite a creative space as well.
Yes, I agree. I think coming back to the conversation of our own journals, we've identified and discussed already that there's it's quite, in a way, it's quite limited. and we're touching on how to publish in other journals as well. But what we did find, our respondents were very strong on the need to ensure we do keep the debate within our own field and our own journals. I mean, well, hopefully I'm not contradicting myself here about the opportunity, yes, to publish outside if you need to, but what we don't want to do is to find that we don't populate the debate and the intellectual, theoretical conversations that take place in our own journals. In other words, just get pulled apart. So it is a balance, and the strength of our journals will only improve the more that we actually support them, you know, and ensure that high quality work goes into them. Joe made the point earlier, which I think is something that I'm currently evaluating outputs for all disciplines in the business and management field in the UK, because we have an exercise called the research evaluation framework at the moment, which it takes place every 5 or so years in the UK, and it's a big exercise. And what we're finding, or I'm very much finding, I'm doing blind reviews internally and externally of papers from all disciplines in the management school. And what's fascinating is you can rank your journals, and there is a correlation between the quality of the paper and the ranking of the journal. But trust me, it is not watertight. And what is very noticeable from the external evaluations of the communications outputs and the publications that we have is, I think the benchmark is often quite high in some of our journals, because we are getting external reviews, and these aren't just by sycophantic fellow PR academics, by the way. I've deliberately taken these to very, very experienced auditors of this REF process, who've gone through the REF process, who are evaluating our work. And often we are quite cautious in our self-evaluation and our internal evaluation. The external evaluation can often be quite a lot higher. So it's quite interesting that, you know, we just need to be careful how we benchmark the work that we do. It's not, and our own journals, whilst on traditional ranking lists may sit in one place, does not necessarily mean that the work contained within is all of the same standard, if you follow that logic of argument. We have got, Jow's got another question for auditors whose main language is not English and whose faculties do not support translation. What do you recommend in order to make sure language is not a barrier against publishing? I think, I mean, there are many strategies that colleagues use without mentioning the obvious. I mean, many of my academic peers who speak and write far better English than I do. I'm absolutely convinced of that. But in all reality, the use of course, proofreading services is important, so to ensure that the work is proofread. But the other one, which I would either encourage or support, and again, many of us do it both in an intellectual sense, but also in a production of content sense. If you're coming from a certain national context and language context, working with other academics who are maybe used to publishing in second or third languages can be very valuable, because you can share that learning and also share the editorial process of crafting the final piece of work. So collaboration is a very good one. And that does not mean, by the way, I'm only talking about collaborating with first language English speakers or first language French speakers, if depending on which language you want to publish in. But actually collaboration itself means that the process can be improved. And I think also the flow and the sense making of your paper can be stronger the more it's written with and editorially read by more people. It's just a perception I have of working over many years with other people, is that it does improve the quality and standard of the work. Anyone else got any comments on that?
No, I'd say what you said is the kind of recommendations that came out of the research we did. So like forming that connections or forming those collaborations is definitely really helpful. And then if you can get some proofreading, either just informally or paid proofreading, it can really help, just to, as you said, help with the flow of the paper.
If I could just make one other point on that, which is actually linked to some degree in a lot of our best research comes from funded research. Many of us, as well as having pressure to publish, also have pressure to win research contracts. And I'll just make the same observation that collaboration and collaborative research is probably the greatest asset in being funded for research going forward. So that's not only working in multiple teams, not just in your own department or institution, but possibly outside, possibly transnational, possibly with bringing in insights from other disciplines. These are very strong metrics that those of us who go for research grants are finding are being valued and are being evaluated by funders. So that's just another thought, which is actually encouraging, if you like, the collaborative endeavour of publication. We've got the next question for Farah. Do you think these journals are valuable for the PR sector? International practitioners cannot read because of complicated language, presentation of findings, etc. Irrelevant topics. Now, I'm not quite sure which journals we're referring to.
I'm guessing it's the ones that we highlighted. So they were the Public Relations Review.
Oh, I see. From
Management. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do we mean, sorry, I'm just trying to work this out. Is anyone else, is this for practitioners, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I think there has always been, I mean, I've got two heads and two hats on with this one, because at the end of the day, our academic journals are, in an ideal world, all of our academic publications would be read by our practitioner community. In reality, they're not, but there are some very thought-leading practitioners who are really enthusiastic consumers of our academic publications that we produce. So ultimately, our end reader is probably each other. I know that, and it sounds a bit tragic, but the truth is that scholarly publications are generally for scholars and students of the discipline, and that's why we write for and write in that particular style. There are some journals we have which are more appealing to the practitioner community, that bring in more applied research, and they do in fact encourage practitioners to bring their applied research into play. And they are perhaps a little bit more accessible. So I take your point very much. I think there's probably moving forward, one of the other things to think about here is, and a job that some of us do with our research, is we translate it. I don't mean, you know, to make it simpler, but we certainly move it into different publication spheres. So if you have work that you think has resonance for practice, one of the things to do is to work with practice, either national or international practitioner journals, and publish in that forum. It's something that many people do. It does work very well. It's a great way of translating your research to a broader community. Communication director from the European Association of Communication Directors in the past has done that very well, where it's been welcoming of translated research findings to things that have resonance for the practice community.
Jo, do you want to add to that at all?
Just to say, there's a sort of a long historical tension, particularly in a field like public relations, between the academics who are publishing in journals that have quite strict requirements about language, concept, tone, style, in order to get published. So the academics are under pressure to conform to that language or code. And of course, the practitioners then complain that it's gobbledygook and incomprehensible. So it is a problem. And in fact, our field is, Ralph has highlighted some of the best practice, but it's also true that on the whole, there is less engagement with research findings amongst practitioners, although a lot of people are trying to encourage it, than there is in other fields, where it would be routine to read the journals in your fields in order to be a highly qualified practitioner in, you know, medicine or law, what have you. So it's a bridge that a lot of people have been working on, these bridges, for a long time. But it is difficult because the pressure to, as we've found in this research, there is a particular pressure on academics to publish in journals that require a particular style of writing in order to meet their publication standards. So it is a continuing problem.
So we've got the last few minutes of the session, I think, as we run the clock down. I just wonder if no need to put it into the Q&A unless it suits you to do so. But we've obviously presented the research we've done and the findings we've got. We will be producing a full paper and a report to you, Prayer, on that. You're also welcome to have our slides, and we'll share our slides at the end of this. But my question was going to be, I guess I'm just really interested in if there's anything that we found that does not resonate with your experiences. We would really welcome that feedback, because of course, you know, some of the comments and questions and the sharing with other colleagues to date have reinforced what we found. But we would certainly be welcome if you think we may have missed either something in the debate or something in the experiences, which would help us to understand what we do going forward. One of the things that we have hesitated from doing, although it comes out in the opinions of our respondents, is to say which journals are the kind of more established or arguably preferred. Now, we're not going to rank our journals, because I think we've had a long philosophical debate amongst ourselves that ranking is not particularly that healthy. But having said that, it does help us to realise, you know, where for early career researchers, where is respected, where is good to go, and try to get your work recognised. We really, you know, want to be able to acknowledge that with the journals that we have. And we also want to encourage, to some degree, more journals in the field. As I've indicated, you know, there are more than, and you'll see that in the full report, many more, you know, that touch on the edges that are emerging now into the public relations space. But it's also the simple fact that there's many people trying to publish, and the pressure to publish means there's only a finite amount of space. So as the discipline either morphs and changes and solidifies with new sort of niche areas, there may well be more opportunity for either for new journals, or certainly for more and more, as we've indicated, special issues that allow us to go more deeply into the topics that we're identifying and that we're debating and that we're discussing. So hopefully our contact details are quite well known. Please do feel free to give feedback either through Uprera and through Virginia via as the coordinator, or through myself, Joe, or through Gemma, through our contact details on the Uprera website. And I think we're kind of about a minute before cut off, and I'm very conscious with these sessions that we don't want to overrun. Does anyone else have a closing comment, Joe?
No, just it's been you know, really interesting questions. Thanks so much for the feedback and the questions. It suggests that there's quite a bit of resonance between what we've found and what others have experienced. And thanks for the contributions.
Yep. Okay. So I don't think we're going to get any more questions coming in. We're literally on to the hour on my watch. So unless there's anything else, I will say thank you to Virginia for helping us to set the session up, the workshop. We are in a series of workshops, as I think some of you on the call will already know, through Uprera. So please do check the website for the other ones that are coming up. And we hope that you can join us at those conversations. There's quite a few different and diverse presentation workshops going on during this period. It's a great shame we weren't all able to meet together at the Uprera Congress in Pamplona, but the good news is that we are hoping to be back in Pamplona approximately this time next year, in October next year. So we do hope to be able to come back as a community to meet and do this all in person. So these workshops are really trying to kind of engage with some of the output, some of the productivity that we've had during this last year that we weren't able necessarily to present at the annual Uprera Congress, but we will meet again, as we like to say. So thank you to everyone who's joined us. Thank you to Joe and to Gemma. We've had an interesting year doing this project, and it's been very informative for us and very instructional. And there will be some, as I've suggested, some outputs that you'll be able to read and digest. And we really do welcome all of your input going on with that, so that we don't just leave it to gather dust on a shelf. We really want it to be a live discussion moving forward. So thank you to everyone for joining us, and keep well, keep safe, and we'll speak again soon, I'm sure.